What do you think the most overrated metrics are today that people maybe lean too heavily on?
I hate to say it because I've seen a lot of companies move on from it, but at the same time, there's still companies that are hugely relying on ROAS, and even like profitable ROAS. Again, that's a data point that is heavily reliant on the platform. It's also heavily reliant on third-party cookies for the most part, or third-party measurements. So it just misses the incrementality and the retention value.
How do you see AI and the automation it brings impacting performance and retention strategies in marketing?
It really was that inflection point in the last few years where it brought that real-time information right to anyone's hands, right? So it collapses that gap between data, creative, and execution. I do see AI just really allowing for that real-time decision-making and empowering, somebody even on the creative side of understanding, okay, that message, that value prop did this for Google, and it may have worked great or it may not have worked, but it's telling me why, and I need to figure out, okay, what's the next creative sample that I'm going to put out there.
Do you think the next big opportunity is improving acquisition or maximizing retention?
I really believe it's retention for a newer or upcoming brand, but the retention side is so critical, and you mentioned it even earlier about losing your customers, focus or attention, right? So AI can play a big role in that. I would say, in this day and age, retention is going to benefit more than ever from AI.
Welcome to the MarTech Matrix, a Blurbs production. Blurbs is a community platform built by brands, designed around how they want to search for solutions, not how vendors want to sell them. It's where marketers and e-commerce leaders find the right tech faster, with clear answers and no sales fluff. Each week, we bring that mission to life, interviewing MarTech founders and industry pros to explain what they do, the problems they solve, and how the space is evolving, all without the buzzwords. And now, your host, Sean Simon.
My guest today is Mark Deruyter, a seasoned digital marketing leader who's helped shape growth strategies at brands like Columbia Sportswear, Guitar Center, and Ohm Mushroom. He spent his career at the intersection of performance marketing and MarTech, seeing firsthand how the way we buy, measure, and optimize has evolved from gut feel and relationships to data, dashboards, and decision overload. Mark's also an advisor for Blurbs, and he put it best when he said, relationships were crucial for identifying technology and partners. Now with smaller teams, numerous choices, and limited time, Blurbs is essential for efficiently finding suitable solutions. It has become a key part of my process in selecting the right partner. Today, we're talking about how smart marketers are picking their stack in 2025 and what it really means to move from gut feel to data truth. Mark, welcome into the Matrix.
Thank you so much. Really, Sean, thank you so much for letting me be here and excited to have a conversation.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you here and get your perspective on what we're doing. So you've led performance marketing for brands like Columbia and Guitar Center and Ohm, like we said in the intro. But how have you seen the marketer's job change over, say, the last decade?
Yeah, I mean, especially for somebody like me that has been privileged to be doing this for a couple decades, it constantly changes, right? But it's a great question because I think in the last 5 years, it really changed dramatically. And the biggest thing is, of course, time. I think a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, we can look at things from a weekly, sometimes even a monthly basis and have the time to optimize, have the time to really, adjust. And some of that time was also just relying on the data, and the data wasn't fast enough for a performance marketer to really act on. Today, real-time decision-making is real. That's there. So I think timing is a big part of what has changed, and the fact that every day, even on the weekends, performance marketers are looking at data, looking at what is working, what's not working. I'd also say that the the performance marketing role has really adjusted into an ecosystem, and it's paramount for companies, big or small. I don't care if the team is 3 or 4 people or 50 people. Performance marketers, they work across Amazon, affiliates, Google, and so on, and so they're really touching the whole ecosystem of the consumer experience. And that collaboration with that real-time knowledge and information has to be exchanged, especially with a brand team or some other teams like operations, and that collaboration, we always talk about it. You hear everyone say it's so paramount. But I think it's, today it's critical, for performance marketers. The days of, just kind of being in a silo, working on Google and, figuring out things alone, are long over. So, just I'd say, faster data is much more prevalent today and much easier to get than ever before, and then just that collaboration factor, working with brand teams. I'll just add one other piece. Ironically, I was trained and kind of always had a brand background. And then for the last 15 plus years, I've really spent time in the data and the performance marketing realm. But I've been able to bring that emergence of that skill that was a little bit on the sidelines of branding, really to the forefront now, and working with great brand departments or brand teams to really connect those dots. Because again, it's crucial to tell that story in a seamless way.
Yeah, as you say all that, it makes me think of a sports team, right? Especially a football team, right? Given that we're in football season, and how important it is that everyone play their role. Everyone's got to know their part, and if someone's trying to do somebody else's job or they're not doing their own job, it throws everything off, right? If you're the offensive line and one guy isn't doing his job and blocking, then the running game can't get going, or the quarterback's going to get sacked. And I think it sounds like it's the same here. Like the different people that are, if you're working for a big enough organization and you're fortunate enough to have somebody working in different channels, you got to communicate. You can't just make changes in one channel and not another if they're kind of working together. And if you're a small organization, you're doing everything, man, you're right. That's a lot of time. You're probably dreaming about stuff and, working on the weekends. And I think that's one thing I think salespeople on the vendor side need to remember. And I think most of them do. It's why they're so diligent in their follow-ups is, you guys have a lot to do, especially this time of year, right? So
Absolutely.
cut you some slack.
Absolutely. And just to add one little tidbit, an example, a recent company, was a little bit more traditional, right? Traditional setup in the org. And in the digital performance marketing side, we were constantly asking and working closely with the brand team, but even things like a rebrand, I would encourage organizations to get performance marketers involved sooner than later, versus just, all of a sudden getting this information about a new brand book, right? Without having all that amazing information that they had at their disposal of data and whatnot that could have influenced some of that brand book work, right? And like what audiences work well on performance marketing. So, it was surprising, and frankly, in this day and age, that brand rebrand project was not involving digital performance marketers. So it's still happening, unfortunately, in this world. But back to your point, the progressive, the companies that are the most successful are really working as a fluid team, as most successful football teams do.
So you brought up brand several times.
Mm.
Would you say that brand is more important today or less important? Because there's so many more brands on the market in every category, right? There's the more well-known brands, there's the startup brands. Do you think branding is more important or less important than, say, 20 years ago?
I think it's more important than ever before. I think it just influences things like authenticity. I think 10 years ago, performance marketers got away with saying free shipping or the value props that are obvious and easy to say. And I say that now because everyone knows about like free shipping is like it's like Staples, or things like available now, so those things are just table stakes. So I'm actually excited to see how important brand marketing, that content, that authenticity, is now back at the forefront. And that's going to break you out of the noise because there's so much noise out there. So yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, even though I've really spent a lot of my career on the data and the performance marketing side, more recently I've been able to leverage that brand skill set and or working with brand marketers that are even smarter than I am, which there's a lot of them, but really just leverage them. And frankly, that also in some ways, not just forces, but I believe truly it builds that collaboration that's really necessary, because 10 years ago, maybe you'd have little moments of like, hey, this is great to collaborate on, like a go-to-market plan. But today there's so much like daily collaboration that you can source from each other. It just naturally builds it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I originally asked that question as I've been doing a lot of research in one particular vertical, happened to be cosmetics in that industry for a client. And I am amazed at how many companies are in that space. Like I've never researched it to this degree before, and there are hundreds of cosmetic companies. And so if you're a bigger brand, like does Estee Lauder still stand out as amongst the leaders, or is it some other brand that I might never heard of, but their customers obviously have? It just goes to show, like, if you want to stand out in a larger pack, you've got to have that brand. Let me ask you this, thinking back to the title of this episode, how much of your decision making used to rely on gut feel versus data, 20 years ago versus today?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of gut was involved in the early stages of my career and decision making, and it kind of goes back to my point earlier about real time data availability. Data lagged. And today, thankfully, you can get data real easily, and big or small. It used to be also that large, medium to large companies were only having the ability to gather that data quickly. Thankfully, in today's world, obviously the cloud and whether even AI, the data is at your fingertips. Even if you're a 5-person total team out of a company, right? You can still have almost the same type of data. So that really substitutes that gut to a point. All that said, though, there is still some gut or art, right? There's still some art, and that's where you have to have the skill set to know like what the data is telling you. One, is it true, right? Because I've seen some data where it's like, wait, that might be the wrong input. Something's going on here. That doesn't pass the the gut feel test, right? So you have to have that ability of understanding like, wait, is that really the right data or is that wrong? And then secondly, I go back to there's still creative things that we need to be testing and thinking about from an art standpoint. So even though the data is much more available and much faster, the gut or the art is still a big part of our industry.
Yeah, that's something that you have to experience, right? You can't just learn it in a book. You've got to actually work in the business for a while and experience it and be able to make that gut feel. And I've seen that with younger buyers who are just relying on the data because they haven't had the experience, right? And they're missing things because they don't have that gut. Can you recall a time where your gut told you one thing, but your experience told you something else, or the data told you something else?
Yeah, at a recent company, well, somewhat recent company, a parent company called Implus is a parent company that has multiple brands. And really what's more important here is they have a large prominence on Amazon. They have over 2,000 ASINs across many different brands. And what the data was telling me is like oversaturation, right? Way spending too much money on, certain ASINs and certain product or sponsored brands ads and so on. But the gut told me, well, it's not a money issue. It's more about where the visibility should be, right? What ASINs should we be targeting? So really the gut informed me like, don't minimize the budget because, it's not a ROAS. It's not a, it's not an efficiency or even like a profitability issue right now. It's more about we need to go lean in further into the 20% of those ASINs that are really driving the success of the business and back off on the 80% of the ASINs that are not being productive, even though, the category managers and the product program managers and so on might not enjoy that, and appreciate it, but that was the right thing to do. So while the data again showed it was oversaturized and less efficient, when you kind of redistributed it and really went deep, we saw a lot more growth on those 20%. And I was able to actually double the business within about a year across the Amazon platform or portfolio of those 2,000 ASINs.
Yeah, that makes total sense. But what about tools? Like, are there tools available today that maybe you didn't have access to 10, 20 years ago, but that truly help improve performance of your campaigns?
I mean, the AI driven tools or even the Stacklines out there are incredible. Just the knowledge now of, what's the competition doing, is highly incredible. And that also helped kind of influence like, hey, this ASIN is seeing really poor efficiency, or we're not seeing the type of just the sales that we need. And when you look at tools like Stackline or I can't think of the other competitive assessment, like Helium 10 is another one, of course, and so on. It gives you an idea of like, wait, I'm trying to compete with a heavily competitive ASIN or a heavily competitive category. And instead of keep just banging my head against it, because there's some bigger brands out there that's going to always outlast me or outbid me, I need to pivot and look for those other areas, other ASINs that I have in my portfolio that I can then be more competitive just from the environment that I'm in, and lean in there, and let those other ones like find different ways to continue to, get some exposure for that ASIN. But again, it just really shows like, you can't, it shows where your inefficiencies are, and it explains the why with those type of tools.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you don't have to remember all the vendors. That's what Blurbs is for. They can just go there and
there you go.
one and find out all the competition. So I know that a lot, especially with bigger brands, you have a lot of dashboards, right? Every vendor's got their own dashboard, and oftentimes the data says something different, right? So how do you figure out like what the real story is when you have all these different dashboards saying something different?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, you got to trust the data that's first party, repeatable, and contextual. That is obviously the data that has been proven to be more qualified. Platform dashboards are directional, but they're not as definitive. I frankly validate data from a CRM, from a consumer down to the purchase, and that's because obviously, the platform might not know it to the degree that we do, on the back end side, and that's going to really show you the right type of data to hold across all performance marketing channels. Things like LTV or CAC or category and audience share. Those are the types of metrics that I'm leaning on more and more than ever before, versus again, things that used to be, third-party type data that used to be somewhat accurate, but obviously due to privacy and whatnot, that's no longer the case. So.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's like how much money's in the bank and where did it come from, right? That's the holy grail. So what do you think that, given that there are so many metrics, what do you think the most overrated metrics are today that people maybe lean too heavily on?
I hate to say it because I've seen a lot of companies move on from it, but at the same time, there's still companies that are hugely relying on ROAS, and even like profitable ROAS. Again, that's a data point that is heavily reliant on the platform. It's also heavily reliant on third-party cookies for the most part, or third-party measurements. So it just misses the incrementality and the retention value of the consumer, versus, MER is a good data point, of course, across multiple programs. CAC, LTV, as I mentioned, those are all much more precise when it comes to your profitability as a company. And if you have a catalog that's even larger than 50 products, I'd usually kind of use 50 products. I'd look at each of those LTV, CAC, on an audience or category level, so it bridges it down just a little bit more. But yeah, ROAS in this day and age is, in my opinion, a metric that's gone the wayside, and I could talk also about impressions and so on and uniques. Those are other data points where, but I think most companies have gotten away from those. But ROAS, I still see coming across some previous roles more recently, even where people just haven't gotten off that yet. So.
Sorry, I missed the first one that you said. MER?
MER, yeah, marketing efficiency ratio. So it's, the total sales divided by total ad spend. Now you can do that at the very highest level, of a P&L, which some companies will do, but you can look at MER from, a category down to even, a program and whatnot. But at least that's giving you like, that it goes back to the consumer side. Like, the consumer bought $100 worth of items, and you spent 50, so your MER is 2.
Got it. How do you measure? I'm just curious. Like, I've always wondered about LTV, right? Especially at your one of your previous companies, Ohm, right? It's a smaller D2C startup, so to speak. How do you think about LTV at a company like that, where I may have only purchased 1 or 2 times because you haven't been around long enough, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, coincidentally, in Ohm's case, they're a company that's been around for about 8 years. But just using that same scenario, because I've worked with a lot of companies that have only been around for a couple of years, you start and you stick with it, right? So what I mean by that is you start with, maybe I'm looking at LTV from an 18-month duration, and stick with that for a full year, before you really revamp it. And that's another thing. I see a lot of companies, And sometimes this is due to leadership. Like they come in with a different LTV methodology and all of a sudden everything changes. And, your performance marketing team or the SMEs are like, wait, I had this metric. It was based on an 18-month run rate at a frequency of 3 in XYZ. And all of a sudden this new chief marketing officer wants to come in and tell me that it's not 18 months, it's 36 months, or it's 60 months. And that necessarily isn't, obviously that's their they can do that, but I would suggest, like, don't ignore the current data of what you've been looking at from an LTV. And if it's been 18 months and it hasn't been a full year of looking at that data, give it a year. And that's going to give you a baseline and a benchmark of how to think about LTV moving forward. I guess I like to keep things simple, and I have some other comments about that later. But it's LTV, a lot of times retailers confuse the heck out of it. They're looking at it from is this person back from are they from a list of deactives and whatnot? Just keep it really simple and to say, hey, who's been to the website or to the business or in our database over that certain duration I mentioned, whether it's 18 months or whatnot. What's their frequency of purchasing, and then start extrapolating from there. But your basic LTV metrics or data points from there should at least give you an idea of, like, hey, our common lifetime value of this consumer is $200. So that's going to influence on how much do we think about bringing those type of consumers in with the acquisition side.
Yeah, because I think I imagine there's variables, right? Like if I buy something from you and you continue to market to me and you're top of mind and I need something, I think of you and I buy it, obviously LTV goes up. But if you don't talk to me and I just forget about you, or somebody else takes more of my mind share, then I go and spend my money over there and try their product out. And I guess there's just a lot of different variables, but you have to find your North Star, right?
Yeah, and to stay with that North Star for a while, and as much as I said earlier about how fast data and its real-time information, LTV is one of those metrics where I'd stand by and say, let's give it some time to develop, right? And to really gather the data around that timeline, and then we can understand, like, well, maybe that wasn't enough time, or maybe that was too long of a duration for lifetime value. And of course, every category and every product is going to be different. I was working at Implus, and one of their products is sports equipment, and that's, one of the value propositions is that equipment doesn't break down, albeit it's like $400 or $500. So 18 months is like, goodness, you don't expect somebody to replace that equipment within 18 months. You're looking at 5 years. So that was a whole different scenario, but just stick with it, stick with that timeline and then develop metrics around it and see how it evolves.
That makes sense. So, you obviously worked at some big companies and some earlier stage or smaller companies. How is your process for buying technology, right? For evaluating technology changed or evolved over the last, 20 years or throughout your career?
Yeah, great question. I'd say I've shifted from really just evaluating features to evaluating the speed, the fit, and the impact. And that's just really key. I go back to, in this day and age, you have to move quickly. Business has to move quickly. You have to make decisions quickly. So I'm looking for tools that make my team smarter, faster. And frankly, I kind of think about things in 30 days, right? Can we implement, develop, and put this tool together, and onboard within 30 days? And if so, it might be something that's viable, and goes back to, is this going to benefit my team? And then after that, look at, in the next 30 days after, how much of that tool is being utilized. So I really, look at it from that way, from a speed standpoint, as probably even more important than a feature set, because sometimes the feature set of vendors that come in and say, hey, we do all this stuff. You're like, okay, we can get there, but let's just get this going first. It's like, let's get on the road and start driving and get up to speed of 55 miles per hour and execute on it, versus telling me all these different features where I might not even need that in the first year.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, and I think that's good advice for salespeople too. Is like, don't come in and try and sell you everything. Sell you what you can implement the fastest and learn from the fastest and build trust, right? And develop that relationship, right? Would you say that that's the time to implement is the key variable in terms of what factor matters most, or are there other factors that really are important to you when you're evaluating the tech?
I think it's the time, as we talked about, so you're spot on there. It's also how quickly the team can utilize, right? So, while, the technology might say, hey, we can get you uploaded, get you connected, it's an API connection, we can get this all set up within 2 weeks. Well, how soon then can my team actually utilize it? Because some tools and stuff, they'll take, another 30 days after that for various reasons to collect the data. And while maybe logically that makes sense, let's just walk through that because I have to explain, hey, this tool is going to get implemented from a technology standpoint. Let's just use that same timeline in 2 weeks. But the actual hands-on keyboard utilization of that might be 30 days later,
Yeah.
So it comes down to that type of real detail of timing and ease of implementation is another one, and yes, Shopify in this world we know has made things much easier if you're part of the Shopify ecosystem. But even Shopify would say, and I've dealt with, not everything is as easy as it seems, So ease of implementation is a big one, and the quality of that implementation. And then finally, the cost of ownership, which I think has always been a mainstay, but I will look at that like, everyone does, because, another big component of technology decisions are my financial group. So.
Yeah. So when you look at vendors that you're in need of a solution, like obviously you go to Blurbs now, but what are the biggest challenges you face? So like if you were to go from vendor website to vendor website, or even take meetings with vendors, like what are the challenges that you found in that process? Like I guess maybe ask the question a little differently too. Is like, what do you think vendors miss? Like what do you think vendors aren't thinking about when they come in, or and to sell you their solution, or their marketing team misses on their website?
Yeah, could spend another hour on this, or we could spend the next hour on this. I mean, it's hard first and foremost. I think in this day and age because there's so much noise out there. I give a lot of credit to those salespeople on the technology side because it is hard to get attention of a
Mm,
brand leader like myself or somebody on the brand side that is at the tip of the spear of making the decision. So first off, I empathize, but what I don't allow for, if you will, or even excuse is the technology salesperson or whomever coming in with frankly no information about my company, right? In today's world, you can easily gather a lot of information about any company out there, and to come in and a lot of times they call it a discovery meeting, which is great. Don't get me wrong, I want to tell my side of the story, but to come in without any idea about what you know, and I'm not talking about like, oh, it's, utilizing like, oh, mushroom, like, oh, you're selling supplements. Well, duh, you can figure that out, right? My 12-year-old can tell me that. But,
mushroom.
but give me some really good data points about what you think are my problems, right? Or what you think are some opportunities that are specific to my business, because I go back to, it's almost like interviewing, right? Today's candidates, if you walk into an interview without you know, a a directional plan of how you're going to improve that business, you're not going to get very far. And that's the same can be said about these technology salespeople, where spend the time, and you're going to get a lot further with them, with somebody like me. And then I think it's also just goes back to my point about cost of ownership, but really about like most of us have to. Well, again, the decision is ultimately mine. I have to really partner and convince my financial colleagues, and a lot of times those roll up to the CFO, and just really prove it out, because that's my internal stakeholder, right? That so and that's sometimes where it does take time, and I think sometimes technology or vendor sales don't understand, like, it's not like I can jump on my CFO's calendar tomorrow, and just convince him. Like that takes a little time. So give me the information I'm seeking, and then give me some time. I'm not trying to push you off, because a lot of times it's like they follow up within days saying, hey, have you gotten a yes, no, or are you really the right person to get the decision from? It's like yes and yes, or yes, but give me some more time because I got to get on this calendar. I got to go through the numbers, and those things are, areas that if you can get that partner that can really help you on and to develop that really proof case of ownership there where it's going to benefit the company or benefit the team, it's going to make things a lot smoother from concept lead or lead concept to execution.
Yeah, 100%. Like having led sales teams, if my sales guys, I know how hard it is to get the meeting, and if they got a meeting and they weren't prepared, I mean, there's just no excuse. Like you worked so hard to get that meeting, breaking through all that noise, and then you're not prepared. I actually, I used to advise for a retail brand, and I did one of those shop talk one-on-one meetings, which I'm sure the vendor, I can't remember what vendor it was, but I'm sure they paid $1,000 for it, give or take.
Right.
And the sales guy sits down and he starts asking me questions like it's a discovery meeting. And I'm thinking, you have 15 minutes. You want me to tell you about me? Like, why aren't you telling me about you? Get me excited, get me interested about your product. So I think salespeople just need to, I think this goes back to one of the reasons we created Blurbs, which is like, there's just not enough high quality salespeople out there to meet the demand of 20,000 MarTech companies, right? This is the difference between now and 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get it. It's like, from the sales side, it's like if I spend all my time researching and then I get shut down because that lead is like, no, we just bought a new system, well, which should have turned up in your research. But whatever the case, I get it. That's a lot of extra time. So Blurbs can really help bridge that gap of like, quality lead, quality conversation. But you're spot on too with that. I walked into a lot of these conferences and so on where they have these like, speed dating sessions.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, who you're going to be set up with, oh, Mushroom. Hey, I got Mark Deruyter. He's probably dealing with some acquisition problems. I'm going to come into him with two, like even one solution, and it might not even be the right solution, but at least it's showing me like, okay, this person and their technology or their value proposition is trying to solve something that could be a problem for me. And that goes a lot further than just telling me about all the features, right? Because a lot of those features might not have anything to do with what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I found that too when I was selling tech. If you get in front of a client that you get excited about your technology, they start to like think of all these ways they can use it, even though it's not the way you're pitching it. So, and then you get excited because they're excited, and it's a good relationship develops, right? Let's shift a little bit to the future,
Sure.
right? Obviously, AI is everywhere; it's pervasive, and some people think it's the all end to be all, and some people think it's just part of our technological growth. How do you see AI and the automation it brings impacting performance and retention strategies in marketing?
Yeah, I mean, it really was that inflection point in the last few years where it brought that real-time information right to anyone's hands, right? So it collapses that gap between data, creative, and execution. And that's what I love about, AI tools like, of course, ChatGPT and others out there. But, but at the same time, you need to really have somebody that comes in and helps pilot that AI integration into the ecosystem of the company, which is something because otherwise people are using various tools and then everyone's like, well, what are you using? What am I using? Right. So there's a factor there, but I do see AI just really allowing for that real-time decision making and empowering, somebody even on the creative side of understanding, okay, that message, that value prop did this for Google, and it may have worked great or it may not have worked, but it's telling me why, and I need to figure out, okay, what's the next creative sample that I'm going to put out there.
So given where the market's going in general with different media channels and thinking about the funnel and AI, do you think the next big opportunity is improving acquisition or maximizing retention?
I really believe it's retention, and I have two reasons for that. One, yes, we're always growing as a population, we're growing, but the internet is gotten the digital space, the commerce space has gotten much more mature than ever before, right? So, and as and I still am, of course, grew up in the acquisition space. I'm not suggesting that acquisition doesn't play a part. It absolutely does, especially for a newer or up-and-coming brand. But the retention side is so critical, and you mentioned it even earlier about like, losing your customers, focus or attention, right? So AI can play a big role in that, knowing when to hit them up with, an email or a proactive message or something that might be, hey, you've run out of filters for that, for that water filter or whatnot. in a much more AI driven automation. So I would say, in this day and age, retention is going to benefit more than ever from AI, and just the conversation of those customers that you have in your database than ever before. I've even created some data structures where AI is telling me this group, Mark, has not been not just purchasing, but has not been messaged, in the last 45 days. And it used to be back where you would look up Klaviyo and say, hey, where's my inactive subscription base, right? And you'd have to do the legwork yourself, or have your email manager do it for you. And with AI now, it's telling you proactively, and you can create, scripts and communication back to you about, on a weekly or monthly basis, so that you're now being proactively informed instead of thinking about it as an afterthought. So yes, retention is where I think a lot of this automation, a lot of this AI-driven tech is really going to help.
Yeah, I think there's some brands that do a really good job of it today, and some brands that just don't. Like if I go to a website that I purchased from multiple times, and they're trying to sell me the same product instead of trying to sell me something else. It's like you know who I am. I'm logged in, and I really appreciate it when I get from an email from or an alert from a brand that I subscribe to. Hey, your next order is coming up. Do you want to make any modifications or add this? I find that really useful because I'm not thinking about that. It's not on my calendar that my subscription due date's coming up. And I think that helps build a relationship. Like they get me, and it creates loyalty. So you've been around to see some of this evolution occur within our industry. But when you think about sort of the skill set of a performance marketer in the future, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, maybe 20 years is too far to think out. But what do you think? What's the skill set, or maybe one skill that you think they need to have to stay relevant in the job market?
Well, I think it's, I think it encapsulates some of the stuff that we've been talking about, but to, really be succinct, it's three, right? Fluency of data. Every marketer out there in today's world needs to have data understanding, and it doesn't mean that you have to be some data dog, as they say, and just know every little aspect of, SQL or, whatnot, but you have to understand and know data fluently, right? AI literacy is really important too. And then finally, the value of content in brand and that authenticity. So I think as I look forward and something that I've even been trying to build up on my skill set around AI, because the days of, again, collecting your own data and kind of doing your own analysis, for one, waste time, and two, I want to be able to do it as quickly as AI are over. So I need to be much more fluent in AI. But I also go back to that, irony about my own personal past, but also how I'd really implore organizations to understand how important it is to really bring that branding element into the messaging, so that your authenticity and your seamlessness is there.
Yeah, the authenticity piece it's hard. It's hard, especially if you read a lot of AI. And I think the AI piece is obvious, but I think it's also underrated. And I think about, I have teenagers in school, and the schools are so anti-AI because kids will abuse it, right? But I tell my son, like, if they don't use it for your schoolwork, but I know he's still using it for other things. I try and teach him how to use it. Like, I don't want him to become dumb, right? Like, I rely on AI. Like, I don't have to think for myself. And so whenever I come up with a good use case for my businesses, I'll when it comes in the door, I'm like, come here, let me show you what I did. Let me show you all the thought. Like, I still have to be knowledgeable in what I'm doing. And this just maybe makes it better. It does it faster, but it doesn't have I got to know what I'm talking about. Otherwise it could be getting it all wrong. I used it for a contract the other day. Like, if I don't know what I'm talking about, that could really backfire. So
yeah, it's that fluency, that AI literacy that I was talking about. So that's great that you're doing it. And just one as a quick micro example, it's soccer season / in the MLS, the playoffs are coming up, and my son looked at, hey, when does the San Diego FC, because we're in San Diego, when is their playoff game? And it came back AI driven incorrectly. And he's like, wait, that's wrong. And I'm like, yeah, that's because it hasn't been actually formalized yet. The playoffs up until actually last night, they hadn't been set with all the teams. So AI didn't know that. It just was guessing based on, the dates of the teams. So that was also teaching them, like you said, hey, AI isn't always correct, but you have to know why it's not correct and help, then change the inputs so that AI becomes correct again the next time you use it. So
100%. All right, Mark, this has been great. Let's move into the rapid fire section.
we'll do.
We'll go really quick. Try and make your answers succinct. So right now, what do you think the most underrated marketing channel is?
Okay, succinct, but two of them. Affiliate,
Okay.
just because, again, people continue to see it as a discount channel when absolutely is not in today's age. It is a part of the ecosystem of a journey for a consumer. And then secondly is SEO. It continues to be, the afterthought. But ironically, AI and SEO are so critical. So I'm glad to see actually how important AI is with that, or SEO is with AI, because it's going to kind of bring it back to the forefront. So those two right now are highly underrated, and organizations better figure it out soon, or they're going to get caught.
AEO, answer engine optimization.
There you go.
It's a different beast. You can't just do your SEO and hope that it works for AEO.
Yeah.
What vendor has most impressed you recently, and why?
Yeah, more recently, Detail Page has been really impressive. It's been founded by Spencer Millerberg and Justin Manor, two gurus of the marketplaces. They've spent their time at Amazon and Walmart, and they've really taken this approach of utilizing AI for content to really optimize your ASINs, or in this case, if it's Walmart, your landing page or your product page. And without pitching it, it's really impressive because it takes the time element of updating copy out of the equation, and you can update copy really fast and test things quickly on those ASINs or on those product pages for your marketplaces. So I've been pretty impressed with the Detail Page.
Nice. And I know that brand or that technology. They are listed on Blurbs. I've read their page several times. Okay. What's the one thing you wish every vendor knew before reaching out to you?
I think it goes back to our great discussion, about doing research, but if you had to research one thing, know my economics, right? Mushroom, the supplement mushroom space is $2 billion in 2024. Mushroom is X amount of those dollars. Just know the economics of who and who you're talking to and what the company and what the value is. It's going to go a long ways with those contacts that you're talking to.
Yeah, and that should be easy for them to find out too. Okay, holidays coming up. Any quick tips for brands or agencies or retailers as they think about Black Friday and Cyber Monday?
Absolutely. Well, at this point, frankly, past October 1st, I always thought October 1st was like the deadline. So my advice right now is that anyone listen to this before Black Friday, Cyber Monday is get your variants of copy set up. Right. And what I mean by that is, of course, your main variant, the main approach to your copy has probably already been approved, whether that's email or ad copy and whatnot. But get your B and C plan copy and imagery and all that done. Right. Get those things backed up, because too many times, even in this day and age, companies will struggle and all of a sudden start calling their copywriters and their creative people like, hey, we're 3 days into our event and we're not seeing the type of performance that we need. We got to change it. And you should already have that created. So please, at this point, focus on those variants and have a couple B, C type plans set up.
Yeah, preparation, right? Back, have your backup.
Yeah, preparation, but backup planning preparation, right? So because preparation at this point should have been done for the main campaign, but make sure you have your backup plan set up. So.
Yeah, I can't think of a better place to leave this, Mark. Thank you for joining us inside the Matrix. This was a masterclass in modern marketing leadership and what it looks like. For those listening, if you're a vendor trying to reach marketers like Mark, or a brand trying to find your next great partner, start where the smartest marketers start. TrustBlurbs.com. I'm Sean Simon, and this has been the MarTech Matrix. See you next week.
That's it for today's episode of the MarTech Matrix, a Blurbs production. To see what's coming up next, visit themartechmatrix.com. And if you're looking for your next MarTech solution, start your search at trustblurbs.com, where marketers discover vendors faster.